Hello, everybody. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to have you. And that opening music was from the lovely Tasha, song called Lullaby. And you'll be hearing from Tasha's mother today. So really excited to kick us off that way. So welcome. I wanted to just kind of, uh, welcome you to the space. This is going to be a wonderful session facilitated by the wonderful Jennifer Viets. My name is Miriam Kaba, and I am the founder and director of Project NIA. So I welcome you on behalf of Project NIA and all our community this afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. I want a special thanks to Eva, who has held down the logistics for this event. This workshop it officially launches our fall series titled Build Your Abolitionist Toolkit. Our goal in the series is to explore 6 different resources that help us build daily practices to move us closer to a world free of imprisonment, policing, and surveillance. Together, we're going to learn how we can use abolitionist organizing tools and values in our relationships, in our homes, our schools, our organizations, and our communities. We're going to consider how we can deepen discussions about justice and harm and healing, and we're going to dive into active ways that we can work towards an abolitionist future that includes everyone. In today's session, Jennifer Viets is sharing her new toolkit, Talking Circles at Home, Parenting Restoratively. The toolkit, if you haven't already accessed it, we hope you have and got a chance to look at it before this session. But it can be found at the link that is I'm dropping in the chat right now. So you'll be able to access the toolkit there, and definitely feel free after today to share that toolkit with your communities and use it as you would like. So Project NIA is really honored to share this resource as part of our Building Accountable Communities offerings. The BAC promotes non-punitive responses to harm by developing resources for transformative justice practitioners and by organizing convenings and workshops that educate the public. We collaborated with graphic designer Don B. Kim and illustrator Raven Wells to make this resource visually attractive. Micah B. copy edited the guide, so special thanks to those folks for making this possible, along with Jennifer. The next session in the series is on October 10th, and that will be a practice session on a workbook that was created by Shira Hassan and myself, titled Fumbling Towards Repair. That workbook is specifically for people who are facilitators of community accountability processes, and the session was specifically for people who have a copy of the workbook and have been wanting to work through it with others. So that's what we're doing on the 10th. The session is unfortunately at capacity, but I'm dropping the link to the workbook in the chat for those people who are facilitating community accountability processes and want to order a copy of the workbook. We suggest, if you're not somebody who's a practicing practitioner of CA work, that you first rely on using the Creative Interventions Toolkit. Because that toolkit is free online. It is over 600 pages, but they're making a shorter workbook of it soon. So hopefully you'll be able to access it, take a look at it with your communities, and talk about it. On October 22nd, Atom Fire Arts Cooperative will be sharing their new resource titled How to Share Space as part of a session about creating community in classrooms. So please let all your educator friends know about that session. The registration link for the session will be live on October 5th. And if you follow us on Facebook or Twitter, you'll be able to find the link. I'm also going to be dropping a link announcing the series on our website. So you'll be able to go there and find information about forthcoming other sessions that will be part of the series. So definitely look into that. So we have an incredible team with us today because, as I mention all the time, everything worthwhile is done with others. Today, we are joined by Brandon Kazan-Maddox and Mani Garcia. There are ASL interpreters, and we'll have interpreter next to their name, and they will be pinned on the screen. They will include their information in the chat, along with a link to their Venmo, PayPals, etc. if you want to leave a tip, which is always appreciated. Also, today there's going to be a breakout session at some point in this session. So if you need ASL interpretation for that, please privately message in the chat Ebene. You'll be able to see Ebene and Tech so that you can be put in the correct room when the breakout session starts. We're also joined by Dana Strobers. Dana will be doing live closed captioning for us today. That means you can press the CC button located at the bottom of your screen to access captioning. Anybody can do that. We're also joined by Pamela Quintana, and Pamela is our Vibes Watcher for the event. They will have check-in next to their name. Pamela will be available to chat privately with and or meet people in a different Zoom breakout room where they'll be available to talk and do grounding exercises for anyone who is feeling overwhelmed or in need of support. The link to that special Zoom room will be posted in the chat. Pamela is also available for you to DM separately in the chat if you're feeling like you would like to touch base with somebody, and you can reach out to them that way. Pamela is great. Pamela does a lot of work as a non-binary emotional laborer in Chicago, who I've known for a long time and worked with for a long time, and they're great. So you can connect with them. We're also joined by Ebene Green, and Ebene is our tech director and is holding down a lot of all the security for this. Ebene has tech next to her name, and for any Zoom support or questions that come up for you as you go through. And also, again, if you're trying to access ASL during the breakout sessions, Ebene is your girl. We also are joined by Laura Chow-Reeve of Radical Roadmaps, and Laura is our graphic note taker today. You can find more information about Laura's work at her website, and I'm going to drop a link to Laura's website in the chat so that you have it and you can connect with her as you would like and need. Laura does beautiful work. We're also joined by Lisa and Marie, and they are going to be supporting the chat throughout the evening. So if you put in questions in the chat or things that come up, Lisa and Marie will be checking that out and getting information back to our facilitator, Jennifer. In terms of the chat itself, participants will be able to chat, and we made it so that it can be visible to everyone if you choose everyone. If you have questions, again, drop them in there and people will monitor and keep that together. So Lisa and Marie in particular, Eva will be looking at as well. So sincere thanks and so much appreciation to the whole team for being here and for supporting this event. Also want to uplift that, a big part of us being able to do these kinds of sessions is our individual donors to our work. And so we always appreciate them and what they do to help us get where we need to go. So let's get centered in our values for this event. I'm going to share some words that I appreciate all the time and are adapted from Free Minds, Free People. We believe that at the center of liberation is radical love for each other and for ourselves. That love pushes us to try to create a better world. And because of that, we are working to minimize the amount of harm that occurs in our spaces. White supremacy, misogyny, ableism, classism, homophobia, and transphobia exist everywhere, even in radical spaces. They are some of the threads out of which normative society is woven, and it is hard to untangle them. So if you're called out today, particularly in the chat, in some way for perpetuating any of these, please understand that it is not because you are unimportant or that we wish to exclude you. Instead, we're trying to demonstrate compassion and care and do the least amount of harm towards people in our communities, particularly those with marginalized identities. We recognize that we are all entrenched in these systems of oppression and that we all have work to do. We invite everyone to be accountable for their participation within these systems of oppression. We ask everyone to challenge themselves and to fight against it in these spaces and generally in our communities. If you enact displays of power and oppression, we will talk to you. We will invite you to educate yourself and to relearn how to interact with others in the space without enacting harm. If you cannot or are unwilling to address it, we will ask you to leave. We need both love and rage in every part of our lives to carry on dismantling oppression. Both can be a part of radical resistance to the destructive world in which we live today if we put in the effort to truly learn from and care for about each other. We seek to forge stronger bonds and create a community that we can rely on rather than systems of violence. So being accountable to each other for our behavior is a really good way to start. With that, I want to welcome Jennifer. I'm going to let Jennifer introduce herself to you. But I'll just say that I have always appreciated so much how Jennifer shows up in spaces as a mother, as a restorative justice practitioner, as a white person, as a white woman, kind of always conscious of the space that she takes up and always trying to work with other white people, which I super appreciate, to try to kind of help us get towards the world we actually want. So we are so, so lucky to have you today. Thank you for joining us. That's it from me. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Miriam, and thank you for this amazing team. I was joking in the beginning that I felt like I'm about to pilot a plane, and I've got everybody there, and everybody's switching on controls, and it's quite the operation. So I'm thrilled to be able to share information with you guys tonight. And grateful for this journey, grateful for my journey as a parent, grateful for my journey as an abolitionist, grateful for my journey as a practitioner of restorative justice. And I've been thinking a lot about that journey for myself. And I just wanted to name a couple of things that were really important for me. I have a theater degree. I came to Chicago in 1982 to be an actress, and I was doing that, and then wandered into Children's Memorial Hospital to see if they needed volunteers, and found out they had one of the largest volunteer programs in the country. And I did volunteer there, and I ended up becoming a child life specialist. And it was a very new field at the time. I keep finding myself in very new fields at the beginning, trying to convince everybody how important they are. And my work at the hospital involved creating artist in residence programs, some of the first of the kind in the country, working with children and their families to deal with surgical procedures and painful procedures, running support playrooms for them. And it was there that now I can use the words that I've heard Miriam talk about and many other people, that nothing is promised. Nothing is promised. And I started to learn how important the value of loving people every minute with them and letting go of things that didn't matter. And later on, when I became a parent, that definitely informed the choices I made. My work with the Living Stage Theater in Washington, D.C. informed my work as a parent in terms of really embedding, again, that word of love and gratitude and mindfulness into my arts practice. And I also found out I was pregnant with my first child in DC. And I was like, held by this community of people who really embraced and loved this new thing that I was going to be experiencing. Here in Chicago, I became involved a long time ago. Most people don't know this, with Free Street Theater. Long time ago, 25 years ago. And one of the things I did there was work with a project called Parent Teen Theater. And I was working with pregnant and parenting teens who'd been pushed out of their regular schools and found that they needed a lot of conflict resolution. And so I started to find ways to weave that in. How are we going to better communicate with people? And I ended up with 3 children, right? 3 beautiful, amazing children who are now grown. And all through this process, I'm trying to figure out how to parent as a single parent, how to find community, because I really didn't have any, trying to find practice that would work, and trying lots of new things. And today, where I am, right, is picking and choosing these things that sometimes work and sometimes didn't. And also learning from a lot of mistakes, learning from things I did that I regret, that I wish I had done better, that I wish I'd known more at the time. And finding my way to this moment and restorative practices. So now today, I still consider myself a teaching artist. And I also want to lift up circles and ciphers, which is where my youngest son worked for many years, one of the restorative justice hubs here in Chicago. He's the one who led me to circles, right? So I sat in my son's circles and then learned more and more and more on how to incorporate all of my practices into it. And so that's where I am in this moment, is I want to share with you how I've taken some of these ideas and said, well, let's stop looking at these very large ideas about abolition and harm, and even within community, and just keep narrowing it until it comes down to my daily interactions, particularly with the people who I love the most. And then when we practice in those spaces, that's what allows us to then get better at it, right? So I'm going to share some slides with you today, and these slides are taken directly from the toolkit. And I'm going to walk us through what's in the toolkit, and then just explain a little bit more about it. It can stand on its own, but I hopefully tonight will give you a little more background around some of these ideas. And so, Eva, if you could start those slides. So in the toolkit itself, right, I'm going to talk about restorative language, including I statements and empathetic listening, restorative conversations, talking circles, and the what, why, and how of creating a peace corner. So very briefly, and again, I'm giving you a big overview, okay? So I can do trainings on each small component of this, but I would like you to understand, like, it in the broader context. Restorative practices are often how this work is being referred to in schools, because there's a set of skills that we try to teach everybody in the building to use to build relationships and repair relationships when there's been harm. Restorative justice is where it was adapted to use in our criminal injustice system. And transformative justice, you might have heard different definitions of that, is when we're not just looking at our individual harms, but the things within society that caused all of it to happen in the first place. And so when you hear that term restorative practices, people are usually talking about what's going on in schools. And the components of restorative practices are your mindset, changing your mind, the words and how you say them when they come out of your mouth in restorative language, restorative conversations, which is a very specific set of questions that you ask to get to root causes, and circles, which include talking circles and peace circles. But tonight I'm specifically going to focus on talking circles. So mindset, right? People scooch over this mindset. And it is the most difficult thing I have to do anywhere, is to change people's minds about what they think is the best way of doing things, the way that they've been taught, and don't believe that the new way will work. And so I hear that a lot. That's not going to work. That doesn't, no. And also because people just get set in their ways. And the same difficult conversations that I have with people in schools are the same difficult conversations I have, even if I start talking about defund or abolish the police. And so we can think about just all of the ways that we have been socialized to believe that punishment is the answer. And so I also just, before I begin, when I talk about schools, I just also want to shout out the fact that this didn't appear in schools. Administrators and people who lead districts didn't go, we should use restorative practices. And here in Chicago, it was, again, Miriam and community organizers and parents and students who pushed for this work to be brought to schools. They said, what you're doing isn't working. It is disproportionately affecting Black and brown students. It is harming entire families, which indeed harms entire communities. And we know this other thing that you can do, this new thing that you can do, which is actually a very old thing. It's new for these ideas. And so without the work of community organizers, this work wouldn't be happening in schools either. So I need to change everyone's minds because, right, we have been deeply socialized and completely continue to be socialized around these ideas and as it relates to parenting. So there are still 19 states in the United States, the red states on this map, that still allow corporate punishment in schools. There are still 19 states that allow teachers to hit the children in schools. Here in Illinois, in private schools, teachers are still allowed to hit children. And so if you think about this, if that idea of paddling or harming someone in a school is allowed, that is still allowed, then that is seeping into all of the things that we know to be true about what we believe about punishment and what punishment looks like. I just want to compare that to 60 countries that have outlawed corporal punishment in schools and in homes. So a 2019 study showed that 46% of whites, 59% of Blacks, and 48% of Hispanics had spanked their children. So even though those numbers are dropping, it is still within our culture that spanking children is the answer to conflict. It starts at age 2. It increases between the ages of 3 and 5. And then it kind of levels off and dips a little bit between the ages of 7 and 10. Across the board, if you look at it all the way on up, it's 30% of families who are still spanking their children. Boys are more often spanked than in the American Academy of Pediatrics published, I guess it's almost been 2 years ago now, I don't need studies to prove that things are good or bad, but the study did say that not only is hitting and spanking and threatening harming children, but insulting them and shaming them also has detrimental effects across the board and is lasting. And so even though, right, that's the mindset and that's the hard thing to shift. And I want to say that within my own family, right? That was the culture within my own family that I grew up in, that spanking was that culture, and that it was a hard thing when I had children of my own and chose not to, right? That was not the socialization I grew up with or that my family members valued. And so I had to shift away from that and struggle even within that. So, you know what? This is Molly Costello's image, my friend and artist. And, this piece was created, again, to think about community, of what happens in community and in our relationships with police, that and what we consider safety versus control. But I would like us to consider what we consider safety versus control with our own children, and thinking all the time, am I really trying to keep them safe, or am I trying to control them? And so these questions, these abolitionist ideas that we continue to ask and talk about and think about in our communities, we also need to think about in our daily interactions with our families. So once I get past mindset, right, I've shifted you over and we're starting to be more careful about the words and how we're saying them. There are two main ideas that come up about the way we communicate with people. And that's I statements and empathetic listening. So most of you have probably heard about I statements, right? And so this is it. This is what's laid out for us. Sometimes nowadays they're often called effective statements, and I think most of us have been taught this at some point, right? It's a part of Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication. It's a central component of that, and it's also a big part of restorative practices. And so when it can be used to start a conversation for something very small and minor that's happened, or when it's something big and you really, really, really need to practice it. And there's a format here, which can be deviated from. But these different components are what's important for us to really, really think deeply about how someone's actions have impacted us. And even though we've probably all been taught this at some point, very few people use it. And sometimes it's used in really harmful ways. So like you can take any principles and shift them. This too can be shifted into harmful ways. But I want to break this down just for a minute, right? So I feel anxious. This is one example. When I see pictures of you on Facebook, out and about, and not wearing a mask, because I'm concerned you're not making safe choices. What I want is for you to wear a mask around others, even if you are outside. You can switch the order of this. I could say, when you are out and about without wearing a mask, I feel anxious, right? So starting it and using your own words that are going to work for you, it's just thinking through the different pieces of it that make what you want clear and specific. And so I've included this wheel in the toolkit as well. There's lots of different versions of this. I like this one. I will also say though, I just recently saw one that's, the pieces are pizza pies. It's for kids. So it still has words in it, but it's like different slices of a pizza. It's kind of cute. But the reason this wheel is here is because when we get upset about something or something happens to us, we tend to use a very limited number of words to describe that feeling. And we really need to think more clearly about what it is that we're feeling. So when we say, I feel, because often, honestly, people say, I feel angry. I feel mad at you. I feel infuriated. But really, it might not be anger that you're feeling. What you might be feeling is embarrassed. What you might be feeling is discouraged. What you might be feeling is jealous, right? And so sometimes having words to choose from helps us get deeper about why it is we feel harmed about the situation. And again, for children, I mean, we do this in preschool. A lot of the things that I'm talking about are really, really taught and in preschool. And then once somebody goes to kindergarten, they stop focusing so much on sharing feelings and what those words are and having language for that. So I feel, what is it that you feel? And sometimes we can name it very quickly, and sometimes we need to step back and go, man, what is it? What is it I really am feeling? Wow. Okay, switch. So now I get to this next part, right? I feel when you. So the when you part is not about shaming and blaming. And that's what makes I statements hard. Once you start to really go deep into this, it becomes more complicated about naming behavior, and behavior that you generally can see. What is the behavior that you can see, rather than calling somebody out? I feel like I want to. I'm always going to that. When you act the fool, right? That's not behavior you can see. You have to get very specific about this. So I want you to think about naming behavior that you see and the because of it. And we're going to go to the next slide. All right. What I want is, so I'm going to get down to this next part in just a moment, but the what I want is often left off. So we seldom are taught that part. Sometimes people learn about effective statements without learning the what I want is. And most often when we start to practice these, our what I want is not specific. I want you to act right. I want you to be kinder. I want you to not make such a mess. Those aren't specific enough. And even though initially they might seem specific, if you have to be very clear about what you want, especially with children, and you have to share that with them over and over and over again. So just because, and we also expect children and adults to be able to know better. Well, they should know better. Well, I've told them 100 times to do that same thing. When you run down the street, I feel nervous because I don't want you to run into the street and get hurt. What I want is for you to hold my hand. And the what I want, I also want you to be aware, is going to be very different from person to person. What I want might be very different from what you want and what someone else wants. And so being able to name that and not assume that everybody wants the same thing is also going to help someone figure out how they can change their behavior to help with that. So this fifth component, right, is if you have had your restorative conversations, if you've talked through with an I statement, if you've asked more than once and it still doesn't happen, it's okay then to add that. And if it doesn't happen, this is what the consequence will be. Right? And restorative consequences are a whole other thing and something to think about. It is okay to have there be consequences, but we have to also try these other ways of communicating and asking for what we want and need. And I'm going to shift that. And when we ask for what we want and need, we hope that the other person is listening empathetically. All of these things that I'm asking parents to do are what I want also for us to teach our children. I want us to teach children to listen with empathy. But the reason I put this in here too is because when your children tell you that you have harmed them, you have to be able to step back and hear them. And they might not say it perfectly, and they might say it in lots of different ways. But you have to open up your heart. You have to stand in their shoes and be able to hear what they are telling you, or even watch with their body language what they're telling you, so that you can repair harm as well. And that we're constantly modeling both of these things. We're modeling being able to tell children when they've harmed us in some way, and we're modeling being able to listen to children when they tell us that we have harmed them. I'm going to switch. So we're going to do a breakout. Okay. And I'm going to ask you to try this. So we're going to break out into pairs. And there's going to be a link that will bring us back to this scenario. And so I'm going to ask you, once you get in that room, to read through the scenario again. And one of you is going to give a stereotypical response. All right. And then I want the other person to try an I statement. I feel, when you, because, what I want is. And then if you have time, you can debrief that a little bit, but I do have a second scenario so the other person can get a chance. So that second scenario is another scenario about a teenager. You're 14 and have been watching your 7-year-old. Your caregiver comes home after having been running errands all day. People who aren't wearing masks, they walk in the apartment and look around at the mess in the living room. And the caregiver immediately starts hollering at the 14-year-old for the mess and for not having taken the garbage out. So the I statement is going to be from the perspective of the teenager in this one. Okay, typical response from a teenager, and then trying the I statement. Okay. So also when you get out, go ahead and introduce yourselves in that space. We're going to have about 10 minutes to do this. So if you can brief the challenge of it and maybe even talk about that I want, what would you want, right? Because for each of you, the want could be different as well. Okay. So we're going to go into breakout rooms.
1 moment, me like 2 minutes.
Sure.
Please forgive me. Give me 1 more moment.
Ebony, it looks like there's several people that aren't going to be able to be in breakout rooms for multiple reasons. What can we figure out maybe an alternative way to do this, Jenny?
Absolutely.
We can do it just as a group of folks and then keep it moving.
Absolutely.
There's just a lot. I see it because I don't think Ebony is going to be able to keep up with all the folks that are saying, I'm cooking, I've got a kid, you know.
Of course.
Yeah.
So let's go back to that scenario number one. I'm wondering if anybody would like to or would feel comfortable on muting themselves and just trying it. Would somebody be willing to do that? Thank you, Victoria. I see that down in the chat. Go ahead.
We can have Ebony unmute.
Am I?
He's unmuted.
Okay, great. Yes, you're unmuted, Victoria. Go ahead.
Okay, so just to be clear, am I doing the I statement response?
Yeah, go ahead and try the I statement.
Okay, so it's I feel frustrated when you don't put on your shoes when I ask you to because I'm trying to get us somewhere on time. What I want is for you to put your shoes on so we can go.
Great. Sounds great. Would somebody, let's try the second one. The second scenario on the next slide. There we go. Would somebody like to try this one from the point of view of a 14-year-old?
So maybe we'll read it out loud so people can hear it if you're not actually watching the screen.
Sure.
Yeah.
You're 14 and have been watching your 7-year-old sibling for the afternoon. Your caregiver comes home after having been running errands all day around people who weren't wearing masks. They walk in the apartment and look around. They stop and they look at the mess in the living room and they immediately just erupt and start hollering at you for the mess. And then they look and see that the garbage isn't out and they'd asked you to take the garbage out and the garbage isn't out. And so at this moment, the teenager, this 14-year-old, can choose to respond one way, but they've been working on I statements, and so they're going to try an I statement.
Wonderful. We have Iris and Ife would like to do it. Unmute and go for it. Iris, are you able to unmute?
Yes.
Awesome.
Okay, Ife's going to do it.
Okay. Thanks, Ife.
I would say I feel frustrated and confused when you come and yell at me, because I'm trying to take care of my sibling and I have other things that I also need to do for myself. So I would like you to next time that you come in or in the future to please try to be nicer to me and ask me like what I've been doing or like to help in a nicer way.
Wow, that was beautiful. That was perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, and then we have to step back and hear that, right? And then figure out how to repair the harm and prevent it from happening again, which would be those next steps. And you might not be able to do that right in the moment. You might not be able to make that I statement right in the moment. You might need to take some time and have everybody calm down. And that's the thing that is going to be a through line for this, is that everybody has to be calm in order to try any of this. And so working on our skills too, when we're escalated, to calm down, right, is going to be extremely important. All right, let's shift to the next slide. Thank you, everybody. So once, right, we have that beginning of a conversation, then we can go into what would be called a restorative conversation that includes restorative questions. And again, these things that I'm talking about, I have some directions for in the toolkit, and lays out these questions for you. So some of the slides that are coming up are directly in the toolkit as well. So we're going to shift to that. Right, so restorative conversation is slightly longer than just making an I statement. It would be when there was greater harm, or you maybe gave the I statement and then later on came back to sit down and really talk more deeply about it, right? So these 6 restorative questions are used everywhere. Sometimes there are 5 of them, but I love the 6. And the really beautiful thing about this is the same, these questions for with children of all ages and in community when harm has happened, these are the same questions. These are the same questions that are asked in the Restorative Justice Court in North Lawndale. And it helps us to neutrally hear from someone and get the full story and hopefully try to get the root causes. And the other cool thing about it is we center the person who's been most harmed. Sometimes that's hard to figure out, especially with children, actually with all people, because often everybody has been harmed in some ways. But if you have a very clear idea of who's been the person who's been most harmed, then you talk to them first, as opposed to, your child runs in and says, Jonathan knocked me down. He pushed me for no reason. And you go, oh, okay, go ahead. Jonathan, get in here. What did you do? Right? So again, the person who's been harmed is like off somewhere, right? And all of the attention and all the centering and all of the judgment around actually what happened goes to the person who caused harm. So you first want to talk to the person who's been harmed. And that language that I'm using is the same language we would use in community. The same language. I have to change people's minds, because people in schools and adults everywhere are still using language of the criminal justice system. So in schools, they still refer to very small children as perpetrators, right? And other language that they use. So we want to shift that to who's been harmed, right? So the first question is, what happened? And most of the time when I talk to adults, this is the one that throws them the most, right? As opposed to, what did you do? What did you do this time? Or just giving them that look, right? The assumption that they've done something, that it's their fault, that they're the ones who started it, that they're the ones who caused everything, as opposed to simply asking what happened, right? And then that next question, what were you thinking at the time? How have you been affected, and in what way? What's been the hardest part? What do you need to make this right? And that's why it's so important, again, right, that we talk to the person most harmed, because they're the ones who get to decide. They're the ones who get to offer up suggestions on what they need. I am not going to be the one to say, you need to go and apologize to her right now. Go give your sister a hug right now. Go pick up the things for her. I don't know what the sister wants, right? I want to ask her. I can help with some of that. I can help. I can give ideas. We can learn along the way, but it's not, I'm not going to be the one deciding for everyone. And how can we make sure this doesn't happen again? And this goes back down to, right, ideas of transformative justice. So what is it in my house that's allowing these things to happen in the first place? What are the bigger issues at play that have fostered this kind of groundwork for whatever conflict is happening? And how do we as a family, as a community, start to figure that out to prevent these problems? I'm going to shift to the next question. And so when speaking with someone who's caused harm, it's just slightly different, right? What happened? What were you thinking at the time? What have you thought about since? Who's been affected by what you did and in what way? What do you need to do to make things right? And how can we make sure this doesn't happen again, right? We're asking them, and then we try, and then if we need to, we bring people together. Once you've talked to people separately and individually, then you can bring them together to talk it out and come up with the solution to the problem and what needs to happen next to repair harm. And there might be some kind of consequences involved that you all agree on that seem to be a reasonable consequence. I want to emphasize that your tone of voice and your body language that you use when asking or answering these questions is important, right? So we want to, again, be calm. We have to be ready to engage in these conversations. I love this little acronym I've been using for many years. Many of you have probably heard it. HALT. Stop. HALT. If you are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, do not engage in an important conversation. And that would be true for your children too. And I'm going to talk about that later in terms of a peace corner. But for yourself, when that caregiver came into the house with the 14-year-old, they clearly were tired. They probably needed a snack and were a little tired and angry, right? And so they needed to have gone and taken care of themselves before coming back in to even have that conversation about the mess. Okay, so I'm going to stop right now and see if anybody has any questions before we break.
So I have about 4 questions that have been submitted. Okay, now 5. The first one is, can you offer some specific examples of restorative consequences?
Well, the consequence has to fit the action. So if you've asked many times, I mean, I'm making some things up here right now, but if you've asked many times, if you delivered I statements about why you don't want somebody going into the snack drawer or going and getting those snacks and having so many snacks before dinner, and you've told them why over and over again, I'm going to ask you, what would a restorative consequence look like for that?
Next question is, how can I become a restorative justice practitioner in my community? Do I need formal education or certification? What are the first steps?
Well, when kids ask me this in the hallways of schools, what I tell them is, this work belongs to the people. You can be a circle keeper, be a circle, like, come on, let's do this. Right? So I do want to say that first, right? That there are people offering degrees and certifications. And remember I said that like the child life field was new for me. This is still a fairly new field, right? So even the work in schools or in communities, right, has been like since the 70s. And it's still only now, the words are coming out of people's mouths, but they're still not clear about what it means. And so there are places here in Chicago, and depending on where you're from, where you can go and do trainings. The Community Justice for Youth Institute has trainings. There are different trainings that are offered. And then the thing that I most often say is sitting in circle and finding opportunities to be in circle, to learn the circle component is one of the ways that we learn best. I mean, because it's a new field, finding people to mentor you and to take you up through this. And I will also just say that what I want to do and what I've talked about a lot, I didn't mention this at the beginning. I'm a restorative practices coach for Chicago Public Schools. So that is my job in schools, is to go out and train and offer trainings to people, to all staff, to parents, to teachers about how to do this work and how to stop being punitive, because they still are. And the disproportionate and the numbers are still out there that say even though suspensions and detentions are down, it is still disproportionately affecting Black and brown boys, and then Black and brown girls on the rise as well. So that disproportion hasn't changed. And so there's still a long way to go for the work in schools. But I started to say what I want to do is there should be these positions all over in community for everyone, but we got to start training up young people, particularly the people who have been harmed by this, to do this work. So I am going to, sharing my email out, and even the question that I really didn't get to answer about what would be an example of restorative consequence. I'm happy for anybody to reach out who wants more, and I can share a lot of different resources beyond the toolkit. This toolkit that we're offering right now is like a small version. And for those of you who happen to be in Chicago, and if you're in CPS, like you can have me come in and do all kinds of trainings on these things. And so I'm happy to offer that as a support, and to people outside of Chicago as well, but it'd be much easier. Is there another question?
There are many more. Okay. The next one is, how do you navigate these kinds of conversations as a single parent if the harm was done to you?
Well, I think it's the same. I think it's being really clear about how using the words, the feelings, to say how you've been hurt without shaming and blaming somebody. And see, this is where it gets difficult about the I statements, right? Many of us know, right? Other people don't have the power really to hurt us. Right. But with that understanding, we also know that we still do have feelings. And so I think that being able to name our feelings and ask for what we want and make it developmentally appropriate for your children. Do you want a hug? Do you want some help cleaning up? Do you want them to gently touch you? Do you want them to practice using kind words? Do you want to play a game together with them that will make you both laugh? What is it that you want to repair the relationship and to help them understand? And remember that question, who's been affected and why? Right? Is helping them understand that their actions have consequences, that people are affected by our actions. And when we as adults, and adults do this all the time, oh, it didn't really bother me all that much. Oh, well, it didn't hurt when he jumped on my back like that. I'm tough, I'm strong. That doesn't help people understand that their actions have consequences. And so even though it might not have hurt that much, and even though you are in control of your emotions, being able to name your emotions is very important, because we're modeling all the time. We're modeling getting angry and then verbally saying out loud, I need to calm myself down. I'm going to go sit and be peaceful for a few minutes before we talk. Right? Or I feel so angry right now, I don't know what to do. I'm going to go do the dishes. That always helps. So we have to be realizing and modeling. Do you have another question?
Yes. So I'm interested in hearing about restorative responses with a child who gets upset very quickly, often without telling us what has upset him, and has difficulty seeing or hearing anything through the veil of their emotions. They can't even hear the words that we're saying because they are so upset.
Right. So this is where I want us to think about the proactive things that we're doing in our spaces and be very intent about looking for when things are starting to escalate, what's preceded it, the time of day, who it was involved with, and all of those things, so you can start to look at preventing it from happening in the future. And that is challenging. So everything that I'm telling you, and somebody said earlier, as a single parent, or, you know, when people get angry very quickly, or how do I learn about these things? We have to do it in community. We have to find out, and I didn't have that. But I do now. And there's people in this call who I chat with. There are people in this meeting today who send a message to me and say, I'm about to lose my mind, help, right? Who help us calm down. And so we have that very specific group. And, you know, some of you have done pod mapping. Who's your pod for parenting? I'm getting all worked up here now, but all of these ideas that you're taking out into community, how are you helping each other within your homes as well, and with other parents?
I'll combine a couple of questions, and you've addressed this slightly, but suggestions for shifting family dynamic when this model isn't practiced at home. How do you do that?
How do you begin? Like, where do you begin? Is that the question?
Like, do you start modeling? Do you sit and try to explain more about how this functions in the house? So.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, the second half of this is going to be about talking circles, and I'm going to break in just one more minute because we've got to, I do want everybody to be able to have a break. But that circle practice is a really, really beautiful way to start to name feelings, to have a space where you can share with one another, to get used to circling up proactively for fun things, and to be as a family together. Because then when you practice that, then when harm happens, it's much easier to say, hey, everybody, I think we need to talk about a circle about what's going on today, because I don't even know. Everybody seems to be really crabby. Let's circle up. So once you set these frameworks in place, then the little things start to come, and you can use that process and the formality and the structure of it to begin to add other things. Absolutely. I'm throwing a lot at you. I'm giving you ideas. Take what you like and leave the rest, in combination with other things that you want to learn.
I think I might want to this is Miriam, just jump in. I know you want to take a break, Jennifer. So can you just repeat the acronym for HALT, HALT, and then take your break? And then, absolutely. Yeah, Marie or Lisa will be back for questions later.
Okay, right? So you can probably guess what they are, right? Do not get into a deep conversation with everyone. I also want to name that I've been talking about children and their caregivers, but honestly, the modeling that happens, if you have a partner in the house with you, you really have to start there, right? The modeling that you two do with one another, or you three, or whoever's living in the space with you, is also the modeling, right? That's happening for your kids. So you can practice with each other these same principles. If you're hungry, if you're angry, if you're feeling lonely, and if you're just tired, wait to have that conversation. Take the time you need. I just want to say this one thing. Most people don't know this, but when adrenaline rushes through your body, when something big happens and that rush of chemicals rushes through your body, it takes a minimum of 20 minutes for it to dissipate through your bloodstream. 20 minutes to an hour. So when your kids are escalated, they cannot have a conversation with you. When you are escalated, you have to think about that 20 minutes, at least a minimum, to let the chemicals dissipate. And the brain science too, I would love for you all to study, but, to get that dinosaur brain disengaged and get your prefrontal cortex working. Whew. All right, so we're going to take a break. Is it 10 minutes, Eva? How long's our break for?
Yeah, that's what we discussed, but I think that you get to call the shots.
Yeah, because I'm not too far off. So let's do 10 minutes. Okay? And get a snack if you're hungry. If you're dehydrated, get something to drink. Do a stretch. I forgot to do my stretches in the beginning. I'll do them when I come back. I also don't mind hanging out here. If somebody has a question, I can look to.
The truth is all these rhymes barely hold me together, but I still try to bear it through the bad weather. Winter's harvesting, so unforgiving, inside hiding. It's okay, don't want to be seen, but there's still a moon, and I still really love the color blue. And after the quiet comes, I still have my baby sleeping home. Losing what my heart brings, keeping my best thing to myself. heard it long enough to say, far enough to show. Here I am, a grinning girl, caught up in your glow. And what is all your golden light for, if not to sing about? Just when I needed a moonbeam, look at what I found. And this is not the kind of love I'd ever thought I'd find. What's the word for falling into someone else's sight? And I don't even know if I'm grown enough to say these words, but I want you more and more. That much I can be sure of. Tenderness the first to take, so tenderness we find. Bring us sleeping, bruising bones, I will kiss you fine. Come now, baby, sit a while. This much we deserve. Stillness in a world on fire, and bodies without her. No, this is not the kind of love I'd ever thought I'd find. What's the word for falling into someone else's sight? And I don't even know if I'm grown enough to say these words, but I want you more and more. That much I can be sure of. No, this is not the kind of love I'd ever thought I'd find. What's the word for falling into someone else's sight? And I don't even know if I'm grown enough to say these words, but I want you more and more. That much I can be sure of. Ride that whip on over to me. Haven't seen you in a minute. Only all the possibilities we got to make this world shine. You and I, we are infinite. Come sit with it. Feel those vibrations. Feel how we radiate that hope and salvation. Babies we defending on us. We finna save them. Liberate them. Rid this world of our subjugation. Cause we got power. We got power. We got power. Black power. Hey. So we got power. We got power. We got power, black power, and we got love They try to make us hate each other. They try to make us hate ourselves. But we be fighting strong together. Ancestors watching on, they watching on forever. They can't take away our love. They can't take away our creativity. They can't take away our resilience, our ability to rise up to fight all reality. Cause we got power. We got power. We got power. Black power. Hey. Say we got power. We got power. We got power, black power.
This a black familial act, bursting with raw melanin from freedom feeds and nigga naps. Our energy frequency infinite. We the beginning, middle, and the end. Middle passage in our stomachs, built the country on our backs. Hips, lips, thighs, remind me of black girl magic. Passion, power to the people.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We're happy to have you. And Jenny, are you back?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, awesome. Can you also look in your chat? Because I just chatted you privately.
I saw the question about.
Okay, cool, awesome. Okay, so we have Brandon and Manny, our ASL interpreters, our live caption folks. Passing it back to you.
All right, beautiful. Right, so the first thing I want to say about restorative consequences, and even the word consequences, is to really check myself, that I have to check myself, that I have to ask other people to check themselves, to find out if a consequence is necessary. If the restorative conversation that you had, and sitting down and talking about it and asking for what you wanted to repair the harm, if that wasn't enough, because sometimes we get stuck in the idea that if there's no consequence, then there's no accountability. But accountability doesn't always involve there having to be more, right? Sometimes that conversation is enough. And so again, thinking about, are you still trying to, in that old way of thinking, teach them a lesson? Well, they've got to learn their lesson, right? And if you truly, truly think about those words, I want them to learn something that will help prevent this from happening again. Not to keep, this is so hard to understand, that you really are still in that frame of mind of punishing as opposed to restoring and repairing. And so when is it necessary? So if you've asked someone to not feed the dog table food because it will make, when you feed the dog food from the table, I feel worried because it might make the dog sick. What I want is for you to help me feed the dog their dog food, but not give them food from the table. And they keep feeding them food from the table. Well, a consequence could be, right, that they need to spend more time helping care for the dog and learning more about how a dog's insides work. And so maybe depending on their age, right, they have to do a little research or read a book and come back and share that with you. That's a consequence. But we get caught up too, if it's not punishing, it doesn't make them feel bad in some way, if it doesn't like make them learn. And so we just have to be really cautious about that. If someone is name calling, right, and they just keep calling name and it's harming people and they don't seem to get it. So then what we're going to work on, right, how are we as a family, remember, that's the important thing in the restorative questions. Not how are you going to prevent this from happening again? What are you going to do about this, young man? How are you going to change? No, there is something in our environment that is also contributing to this. So how are we as a family, as a community, going to help prevent this from happening again? And what role do I play? What responsibility will I have in helping with that? So if they're hitting, so then maybe you're creating a talking circle around around using our hands in ways that hurt others, right? And maybe there's a book that you read, or either there's a movie that you want, a discussion that you have, or maybe that there's a replacement, something that comes into play. If someone has, you've asked them 3 times, one of my favorite books, I think it's in my last slide, is Even If I Did Something Awful, right? And she's playing with the football in the house. Her mom told her several times not to do it. She breaks her mom's favorite lamp. And her mom's crying. And the girl keeps asking through the book, would you still love me even if I did something awful? Right? Because in abolition, no one is disposable. And so, mom says, I will still love you, but I'm going to make you clean that up. And, right? You're going to have to rebuild some trust with me. And so what does that look like to rebuild trust with someone? And, maybe I'm going to keep the football until we discover, that you can be responsible enough with it. So it's very situation specific, and it's very about your relationship that you have and really trying to figure out. But I'm going to tell you what, teachers, your family members, your partners, are going to think and tell you that you're letting people get away with something. You're just letting them get away with that. And we have to be really reflective about that. I hope that made some sense.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to go back to the slides, please. Actually, first, I'm going to take a breath, and I'm going to take a breath in a way that you could do with your children. And that helps me because I need visuals. So I am going to pick up a big mug in front of me, and you can all do this too. I happen to have a lovely chocolate-infused coffee in front of me, and it's big and it's steaming. You can have whatever you want. You can have tea, you can have hot chocolate, you can have soup if you want to, but it's warm and you can feel that in your hands. And I want you to smell it. Take a deep breath, smell it. It's a little hot, so blow on it. And smell it again. It smells so good. Blow on it to cool it off. Take a little sip. And put it down. Beautiful. So I'm going to talk about how to hold a family circle. This description is in the toolkit, so it's a step-by-step. You can follow it, you can add your own things, you can do, but I gave it very specific. So if that helps you to begin and then you start to adapt it to your own, that you can. I'm going to tell you that before I knew what official circles were, before I was trained, I will share that I sat in recovery circles for friends and family for almost 10 years. And that's where I learned that we could sit and hear from people one at a time and listen deeply. And so that's what I started to practice when my kids were little. And we used to do circles every Sunday night. And we had a little journal that we kept. I still have it to look back on. And we talked about, I'm going to share some of these things, the roses and our thorns, and what was troubling us, that we needed some help with that week. And also we always talked about what we were going to have for supper that week, because I was proactively trying to prevent conflict, because we were always fighting about what we were going to eat that week. When it came, what are we going to have for supper? What are we going to, I don't want that. So we would all come to some agreements on Sunday about what we were going to have for supper that week. And we also would talk through each other's schedules, because that also found us in conflict about who had to be where, when, and who couldn't go somewhere else. And so that was helpful for me. And I actually did that. I also have done circles with 3-year-olds. I work in preschools as well. I do circles with 3 and 4-year-olds. It looks a little different. And in between, we stand up and sing, and then we sit back down, and then they hear a story, and then we dance again, and then we pass the talking piece again. There are ways to do it. And people think that children do not have the attention spans to do it. They do. We just have to. I need to move as adults. I got fidget toys all over the place right next to me right now. So I want you to understand that everyone can do this. It's adapted to the ages and developmental situations of the people that you're living with. I'm going to change that slide. So I have learned how to do circles now more formally. And that includes having a centerpiece. And this is so, I love this because you can create this with, when you say, how do we begin? This is how you begin. Hey, I want to do this thing called circles. But we need something special for the middle of the circle to make it look beautiful and more special. I would always ask the young people, like, okay, if you were to have a special meal, it was a holiday coming up and you wanted to set the table, and in the middle of the table, you wanted it to look really beautiful. So when people came in, they went, oh, this is a special meal. It's the same thing. What would you put in the middle? And they instinctively know what would need to go in the middle. And so I say, and this is for us to have a more special conversation. And so the circle centerpiece, these are all, you know, the one on the left is my son's centerpiece. The green one is a 5th grade class. The one with the little camping lantern, that is a 6th grade class. The one with the driftwood is mine. And the one down below is an 8th grade class, collaboratively created. Right? Created with the people you're going to sit and circle with. And so it looks a little different and can change and grow however you want, but it helps ritualize it. This is a different thing we're doing here. And we're going to practice all of these ideas. And we're going to change. Creating your values for your space can also be things that you lead up to. And you know what the really interesting thing is? This summer I sat in circle with a gentleman who's done a lot of reentry work for restorative reentry for young people. And we did a value circle together. And the question he asked was, if you were to co-parent a child, what value would you want to instill in them the most? Which value do you think would be most important? And I think it's so interesting for this workshop I'm doing right now, right? Because we are parenting children. So what values do you want them to hold on to that they think are so important? And there's a combination, but we ask everybody, and depending on their age, we might have a different word for this. And we create these values together that then become something that you can also put around your centerpiece. So the bravery one, I have that right here. I embroidered that because bravery is something that I have to work on all the time. I have to be brave enough to stand up for myself. I have to be brave enough. As an abolitionist, part of my work is to tell people when they've harmed me. And I have to be brave enough to be accountable when I've hurt other people. So I want to remember to be brave in a lot of situations. All these other words that are down there were created by young people. These were words they came up with and definitions that they came up with that when they sat in circle, they were going to practice to the best of their ability. And we practice our values in circle, we get better at taking it outside of circle, at breakfast time, and on the way to school, hopefully in school. And so this is our practice opportunity to practice naming, understanding what values are, and living them out. Talking pieces are generally a part of my circle practice. I'm leading virtual circles right now for adults primarily, as circles of support. So we're each holding our own talking piece and then putting, passing it, and everybody holds their own. But when we're able to come back together, right, there's talking pieces that go in the center that again are meaningful for you and your family. I have a whole little box here, right? I have one that I carried with me into Cook County when I was going into Cook County every month, and it says justice. And the reason I took this with me in my pocket, because there was no justice happening there, and I needed to bring a little bit with me. And that becomes my talking piece. I have a rock I painted that says family, because that's one of my values, is that family comes first. I have some, this is from Standing Rock. 2 of my kids and I went to Standing Rock, and since we're all circle keepers, we said we need a talking piece. So I waded into the Cannonball River and got a stone to remember that time. So they have meaning, they have value for us. You can use more than one, and they also decorate your centerpiece. But the important thing about it is the only one who can talk is the one holding the talking piece. And this helps us practice listening, waiting, patience, those values that you bring, but also the things you're going to need for your restorative conversations, right? For your I statements. So all of these little pieces are practice for those things later. I have 3 circles that I wrote in the toolkit, and I tried to use social emotional lessons that I think people are dealing with right now. The first one is an opportunity to talk about the people that we're missing, and what we miss about them, and how we can still be in connection with people who we cannot see. Each one of the circles follows that circle format of how do you hold a family circle, right? Talk about your guidelines, do an opening, add some ritual beginning, lighting a candle or singing a song or doing a chant or doing some movement, whatever you decide. Maybe sharing a poem, doing a check-in, right? So that's a component of all circles, but your circle could just be a check-in. How are we feeling today? Most often, that's a rose and a thorn. I love props. I've got a rose around here, fake rose around here somewhere. That helps us, the good things, the things that made us feel happy this week, and the things that made us feel sad, right? And then we get to hear from people, because we're practicing the principles of honesty, of listening, empathy while we're in that circle, and we cannot interrupt, right? So the first one is on that. The next one is on is using the story of Frederick, which I love, Frederick the Mouse by Leo Leone. And it's a perfect one for leading up to winter and quarantine, right? All the other little mice are working so hard, and they're all hauling stuff and getting it all done, and they're like, Frederick, what are you doing? And Frederick's like, I'm remembering the colors, right? Because we're going to need some colors when winter is gray. Frederick's the artist. So then there's an opportunity within the circle. The question is, what are our gifts that we bring to the family? What are our talents? Each circle has a game that you can play, because I like there to be fun and joy and things that uplift us too. Remember, these are proactive relationship building circles that formalize our time to share deeply with one another. The third circle is on creating a peace corner, right? And that's what I want to talk about now. If you didn't notice, I changed spaces because I'm in my peace corner. I'm alone in this house, and I still made myself a peace corner. I actually made it a while ago when I needed a separate space to be in. And I remember when my kids were little, I would literally be maybe some of you parents have experienced this. I would be in the bathroom on the floor with my feet up against the door, and the kids would still be like, Mommy, Mommy, Mommy. And I'm like, please just wait. Just give me a few minutes. And so once we established the formality, we got to switch the slides here. I forgot. Oh, I forgot to mention this. Thank you. Each one of the circles also has a list of follow-up activities that most often are art related, right? Because remember, I was teaching art 25 years, and I want everything to have art making and music and dancing. Shout out to my daughter, Tasha, whose music was at the beginning and in the middle. I'm also, you can't see them, I'm surrounded by guitars and instruments here. Art materials. So finding ways to create with one another is another beautiful way to be in relationship and to think about some of these principles and to bring them to life. So there's a list of follow-up activities with each circle. And then switching to the next slide. There's a circle template about how to begin to create a peace corner. So, okay. In every school I'm in, honestly, before, again, I knew formally, right, how to be a restorative practices coach, how to be a practitioner, right? I knew inherently that there needed to be a space in a classroom where children could go who were I can use these fancy words, dysregulated, right? Where things were too much and they needed a break, right? And so I would always ask that there was a space for children to go to where they could have a private moment to calm down, to breathe. It's not often that that space is there, but I'm still working on it. But we also need them in our homes. And so you can call it whatever you want to. You can call it a fort. You can have a whole lot of fun building it. It can be one, if you live in a very small space, find a very small space. How many of you like went and crawled in a closet when you were young? I did, right? I talked to a parent recently who's a friend who said his son says, I am gonna go in the elevator. And he goes and sits in the closet. Pretends he's going up and down. He's telling us, he's using his body and his words to say he needs a break. So how do we create a really fancy as hell elevator? How can we just like make it a really cool elevator and have that be his space? So I'm in my space. Over my head is a tent fly that I have stretched over to things. I'm sitting in a beanbag chair. Next to me, I have a basket. I got the big box of crayons. I was in a circle once and I was talking about how I never got the big box of crayons. My family would never get that giant box. I coveted it with the sharpener in the back. And don't you know, two people from that circle went and bought me the big box of crayons. I've got Play-Doh here. Honestly, this is for me. I've got little lavender bottles of scents. I've got coloring pages, right? What's going to help me calm down? What's going to help me calm down in that space? And what's going to help your kids? Next slide. These are just pictures that I found that I thought were cool. It doesn't have to be fancy. You can look up ones that are super fancy, but can you just throw some pillows and make a cardboard box in the corner? I love the swimming pool one, right? That's so nice. I actually ran camps and I did that once. It was bird camp and we had the pool be a bird's nest. Oh my gosh, the kids were in that all the time. Just, blankets, sheets, something, but you're not going to make it for them. You're going to do it together as a family. And then I want to ask you, where is your space in the house? So if the children have a space where they can go to calm down, then do you have a space that you can go to too? Are you allowed to use that space or do you need to create your own? And does that become a sacred space for you? Let's shift the slide. Okay, so it's not just like you build this thing, right? And in that circle about the peace corner, it lays it out. You've got to, and this is a changing slide, so you've got to hit the next button on this one. Yeah, so choose a calm down strategy. So when you want someone to go there, you remember when I said so if you're having a restorative consequence, what might be, I need you to have some replacement for this negative thing that you're doing. I need you to have a calm down strategy that you practice, so you can replace that other thing that's not working and that's harming yourself or other people. So there might be 3 calm down strategies that your child agrees to that they're going to try when they come over here. They can't just come to the Peace Corner and trash it. They can't be throwing stuff around or ripping stuff. Like, there has to be an intention that I'm going to go there. I'm going to try one of these things for a certain period of time so I can come back and be ready to do what's the next thing. Another possible guideline, once you're calm, think through solutions to the problem. Do you need to ask for amends or make amends? Right? So thinking through those restorative questions. You know, in schools, people have really specific worksheets sometimes they use, but honestly, sometimes those worksheets are super punitive and shaming. And it's just like, no, let's look at what wasn't working and figure out what we need to do when we come back. Because you can't just, okay, go, you've harmed somebody, go to the Peace Corner, calm down, well, now it's all over. Right? There still needs to be maybe a discussion of some kind or some repair of harm, or just a coming together to now this is finished. And another, respect the space. That's what I was talking about before. Like, if this is your special space, then don't come and trash it. And you might have the rule 1 person at a time, so it doesn't become a play space. It's different from your play space. Maybe you need a separate fort. Maybe we need forts all over the house, right? But, and also during virtual learning right now, I'm telling you, I ask teachers to have these spaces in their classrooms. So why wouldn't your children be able to say, I need a break, right? And be able to move away from that virtual classroom, go to the Peace Corner for a few minutes, and come back ready to return. They would be able to do that in a real classroom. So really, I would advocate for these things, for especially during virtual learning, which I know is very, very frustrating for a lot of children. Next slide. Oh, these are some of the things. And again, I'm not going to decide what's in there. What does your child want in there? Right? But I do have a link on here. I got Pinterest boards. My kids always tease me because I call it Pinterest. I got Pinterest boards that have a lot of resources in them. So one is on Peace Corners, and you can see a lot of different images and things you can make and put them in them. And another is called Help Me Practice Peace, and a lot of tremendous amount of strategies in there that you can use, again, to work on things. So let me, I'm gonna stop here for a moment, and again, offer up an opportunity to ask some questions. I'm going to breathe again. Does anyone have any questions?
So the next question that was was asked was, can you, and you talked a little bit about this, can you talk about consequences? Does the person who did harm need to agree that consequence is acceptable? Are there consequences that are more or less effective?
I think we answered that one in the.
Yeah, I will say though, I just want to name that in thinking about repair of harm, and Miriam talks about this, right? In those even accountability processes, you come up with this agreement and then it doesn't work. Well, the first thing you need to do is go back and go, did we mess up on the agreement? Did we not think some things through here? Is there something we missed out on? Do we need to amend this agreement? Was it really the community who somehow failed in following through on some pieces about how they were going to support the person who caused harm? So I want to name that. Remember, this is not just about one person fixing it all. Yeah, I think there was a first part I missed.
Oh, you got it.
Okay.
Next, yeah.
So the next one is more about a specific situation, but ultimately about a family who doesn't really talk about their feelings much and been raised to be really uncomfortable in the thought of being vulnerable with each other. So do you have advice for creating this in the family?
Yeah, I do. So, right, if someone's trying to learn to swim, you're not throwing them in the deep water right away, right? And so in your family circle, we're going to have what's called low-level questions, right? So you're not going to go into, tell me about the most awful thing, like, and so you can choose questions that are where would we go on a, you know, if we could take a trip anywhere, where would we go? Where would you like to go? And what would we do there? And let's imagine being there. There's a lot of themes that you could choose to that would be low level to wade into the water and figuring out what emotions are better. So maybe someone can't verbalize their emotions, but could hold up, it's one of the follow-up activities, could hold up a little popsicle stick with an emotion emoji on it. And they can't say it, how are you feeling today? They can't verbalize it, but they would be willing to hold it up, right? Or even if someone's nonverbal, you could use that technique. Also in circle, you can always choose to pass. And so someone can choose to say pass and listen, listen, listen for as long as they need to. And I got stories about that. Kids I never thought would speak, and then suddenly, like, out of the blue, like, I had one kid who got to a point where he'd be passing the talking piece, and then he'd hold it for a minute, and he'd look right at me, and then go, pass. Like, just intentional. I'd be like, it's cool, right? And then one time, like at the end of circle, at the end of the year, he shared something really deep. So I have to trust the process always in all of this work. I have to trust the process and not abandon it and say it doesn't work, just like we do with all other abolitionist principles, right? Well, that doesn't work. No, we have to keep trying and amending and shifting.
Next question is, how are more formalized weekly circles as suggested different than having restorative conversations and daily interactions?
Well, restorative conversations, so just using the I statements and being able to, again, start to name feelings, start to, when you closed the door in my face when I was coming right behind you.
What are you doing?
I felt surprised because I thought you would hold the door for me. What I want is for you to be aware of who's coming behind you. Like those simple things that add up to then the longer conversation that happens. And I'm not talking about this today because it's a bigger process, but could become a peace circle, where that circle process that you've handled then starts to talk more specifically in a ritualized, formalized way about how to handle a big problem that's happening in the house, or a big loss that you've had, or some conflict, a big conflict that's affecting everyone. I will say I also can link you to other things which lays out things in a more complicated, more manner. I want people to have little things to begin to work with.
The next question is, how do you get permission or buy-in to be a circle keeper? Sometimes parents and siblings have harmed their relationships enough to not be trusted.
Well, number one, it shouldn't just be the adult being the circle keeper. It doesn't take very long for young people to be able to play that role or to co-keep. And building trust is a part of the circle process. So you can be in a circle and not trust anybody, and that's all you're working on. And so what is it that you're going to do to build trust, right? We're not going to like these things happen. We're not going to make fun of each other in circle. We're not going to laugh at somebody's idea. We're not going to throw things across the table at each other. Like, life isn't, we're not all peaceful all the time, right? We have big things going on and stresses that are happening. We're working on incrementally building up this practice. It's a practice. It doesn't go, okay, everybody, I'm going to make a centerpiece and we're going to sit and have a peaceful conversation. Like, no, we're practicing it and getting better at it.
The next question is it possible to have virtual peace circles?
Yeah, I've been doing virtual circles since March. And so the peace circle process of repairing harm it depends on the harm. Everybody, just like everything else, everybody has to agree. I have to have individual conversations with everybody involved first. We have to be ready for this. It has to be planned out very well. But there's some benefit to virtual things. Sometimes people feel a little more open to share when they're in their own space. People who ordinarily couldn't come to another space can. They can have all their things around them. They can have their teddy bears and everything. I mean, they can have a lot of things. Yeah. I think I'll answer one more question and then try to finish up today.
Okay, the another question is how to deal with anger in a positive way.
Like, didn't Miriam say at the beginning, we need equal amounts of love and rage? There is so much to be angry about right now. And we don't want to, I am not in the business of behavior modification. I'm in the business of finding containers for people to be able to share that in a way that doesn't hurt themselves, right? What are the rules? You can't hurt yourself, can't hurt somebody else, and you can't break anybody else's property. You want to break your own property. And that's within my family. Those were my family. You can choose to go out and, if that's your family values, to do it in a different way. But no, we have to create containers where rage is allowed. And we find conducive ways to do that. And we have an equal amount of love.
So I want to jump in because I know you want to end, but there is a question that just came up that I think is worth uplifting. It just came in, which is how do you address the way that, and this gets asked all the time in RJ stuff, which I find interesting, but how do you address the way that whiteness sometimes permeates or dominates these restorative practices, especially wanting to avoid tone policing while simultaneously encouraging children to practice regulating emotions?
Right. So, if you look at the way that whiteness permeates everything and the way that we expect children or need them to behave, and then going back to that issue, do we want them to behave this way out of safety, so not like in the grocery store? Or do we want them to behave this way out of control? It's like trying to navigate that. Even not being flexible, with the structure of the circle or anything that I've offered. These are offerings, these aren't directives. So how do you keep some pieces of it, but not have it be stilted? How
think about how did you navigate raising 3 Black children, as a white mom?
Well, I've had to continually learn and grow and seek out help and support and keep going to as many. Miriam, do you remember years and years ago, I was in the back of one of your workshops and I was so Miriam's going to think I'm stalking her.
Well, when you came to my office, right, that time when we had the conversation, you're like, I totally need help with my kid. Yeah.
Show up at different things my kids were at, and I would just be sitting in the back. I would literally be cross-legged, sitting somewhere, listening, right, and learning and finding community because I didn't have community, right? And that's what we're trying to build, is more ways to is feel like I can ask the questions and seek out the answers and be in relationship with people. And so the way that I did that was by reading a lot and saying, what is it that I need? I need for them to feel confident about and strong in their own identity. I need them to be able to choose their own identity. I mean, for me, that was important. I identified them as biracial, and then slowly but surely, each one of them at different times shifted back and forth and now choose to identify personally as Black. And so I lift that up. And everybody thinks I'm doing this. They're doing the work that they do, which is incredible work because of me. And I had some small role to play, but honestly, I'm doing the work I'm doing because of them. And so as we lift up the voices of young people and be in relationship to each other and figure out now, how do I co-parent? How do I not co-parent? How do I parent adults? How do I parent adults during COVID? How do I, it's always shifting and changing. And so the only answer I ever had was love. That's the only answer I ever had. It was my only go-to. I just have to love more. Yeah. And one of the ways that I did it is with this last slide I want to share. So books are important to me. Reading is important to me. Put books in your peace corner. Put books all over the house and read out loud forever, forever. No matter how big they are, read out loud to each other and find beautiful, beautiful books that share the ideas and the values that you're trying to instill. And so these are books that I have on my bookshelf that help create empathy, that help create positive images of who people are and what they can be. You see people who are different but the same as us. All books, 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 read, read, read. And it's for me the best way, and the best way to even develop circle plans. What's a favorite book that you have, and how can you create a circle around it and go deeper with the book and the lessons in the book? When somebody's acting in a way that surprises you, right? That's a modeling opportunity. Oh my goodness. Wow. I think he really harmed someone with those words. How does he need to fix that? What do we think? It's all opportunities for practicing these behaviors that we want to grow into beautiful restorative adults. Wow, 7:27. I'm going to shift to the last slide. I think it's the last one. Yes, there we are. There we are. There's my babies when they were little, and now they're big, and I have a daughter-in-law. Thank you. Thank you to community who supported me. Thank you to everybody, all 12 people who are helping make this happen tonight. And Miriam for suggesting that we make it more beautiful. And would I be willing to allow a designer and an illustrator to work on this little thing that I created? And I'm like, what? Yeah, so to Raven and Micah and Danby, Eva for helping me create this tonight, and the interpreter caption, everybody who made it more beautiful, and who continue to make our world, right, more beautiful. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jenny, for doing all this work, for bringing us together, for walking us through this amazing gift of a toolkit. So appreciate you. Just want to let everybody know that Jenny's email is in the chat. We will send an email back out to everybody who joined today and participated with more resources, more connections, also Jenny's email. And you really can email her with questions and thoughts and comments. She does actually respond and is always willing to, lend an ear and offer a shoulder for support. And I really appreciate that about her. So thank you so much for joining us. Our next session, remember, is 10/22, October 22nd. Make sure that if you're an educator, please tell all your other educator friends and that's happening. October 5th is when we will have the link available on social media. So we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks to the whole team that pulled this together, and good night.